Welcome to the second lecture of the Dreynevent. Today we will not talking about the weapon itself, but a lot about the relation between the body and the weapon in combat. Okay, and we will talk about the relation and how this relation is shown in our sources in our fight books. Okay. First of all, you see I'm a little bit fucked up. I hope everybody of you knows the story already, so didn't have to tell it again. Okay. Yeah. So I will have some partners for this presentation, which will help me in the practical part. Paul and Ingolf. So, you see the title of the presentation is Every Kind of Fencing Has Its Origin in Wrestling. The Influences of Wrestling on the Armed Disciplines in the 15th and 16th century. Why do I hold this lecture? I'm in HEMA now for approximately 10 years. I spend a lot of time in studying training methods and especially studying the problems we have in our club, but also the scene has. Yeah? For example, why the fuck can't we deliver our techniques we have trained in our training into the free fights? What is the problem? What is the source of this problem? Now I have the time to sit around a lot and watch the guys doing free fights or talk about fights, and I see we have a very strong focus on the weapons. Yeah, and I see very nice also in the lectures I'm holding here. I see very nice weapons work. Yeah, but I see only weapons work. Yeah. And most of the problems we have in free fights and also in training right now are not problems which come from the weapon, but they are problems which come from the body. Yeah? Just for an example, the difficult question, how can I train footwork and where in the source can I find footwork? Yeah? We don't have a lot of source material for footwork in the weapons treatises. Okay? I hope I can give you some impulses to check out the wrestling material for these questions. Also can show you the relationship between wrestling and combat in medieval times. And also I hope I can show you that there is that this relationship has consequences for our training. Before you get a red alert now, I don't want you to start to wrestle, okay? This is not a mission like every one of you who doesn't wrestle isn't a fighter, okay? I don't want that, okay? And if you are interested in this point, I invented some methods how you can invent the core principles of wrestling, also the core knowledge of wrestling into your weapons training with daily up to 10 minutes, okay? It's nothing more. But for your understanding of weapons combat, also for the understanding of the generation of techniques and the reading of fight books, it's very important that you get through this stuff I present you here for one time, okay? So first of all, we will talk about the wrestling in medieval times. We will talk about the social role of wrestling. So was it something just like HEMA today, so just the strange people are doing it, or is it something like soccer today? Yeah, everybody knows it and everybody does it in one way or another. No offense, I know, but everybody here is playing soccer. After that, we will talk about the concept of fight systems in the medieval and new and early modern times. And after that, we will talk about the consequences for the interpretation of techniques out of fight books. And after that, we will talk about the consequences for our training. and when this lecture is done, hopefully. Okay, so first part, wrestling in the 15th and 16th century. So when it comes to wrestling, we have two kinds of wrestling in the sources. I had a little bit problem with the first one. The German term is geselliges Ringen. I tried to translate it. It came out social wrestling, but I didn't thought this is right. So let's call it sportive wrestling. But keep in mind, your idea of sport is not the idea of competition in sport in medieval times, yeah? Especially when it comes to using force and violence. So we have the sportive wrestling, like here an example in Fabian von Auerswald, das Ringen in Grüblein. This is all for competition and fun. Yeah? Your goal is to win, but not to kill your enemy. And then we have the combat wrestling. You can see here a picture from Paulus Karl. He is killing somebody, or yeah, let's say he is killing somebody probably with a hammer fist. Yeah, and here you can see the techniques in combat wrestling are much more wider, like we imagine it is in wrestling. It's not about just going there, touching him, and then throwing him. No, in combat wrestling, your aim is in the moment you are creating a contact with your enemy, you are trying to hurt him. Yeah? If you get the fingers, break the fingers. If you get the elbow, break the elbow. Yeah? If you get the eyes, go home with his eyes. Yeah? This is the goal of combat wrestling. Very important, and we have the same relationship also in weapons combat. The combat wrestling is the core of the whole system. Yeah? And the sportive wrestling is taken from the combat wrestling. So we have the same techniques, yeah? We have the same tactical approaches, but the using of force is not so hard. And I said a few seconds before we have the same techniques. Yes, but some techniques are missing. Yeah? It's like you have it when you have experience in some kind of martial arts like judo, when you see the traditional judo of Jigoro Kano. Yeah, it's a little bit different from the judo you can see in the Olympic sports, because a lot of techniques flew out, like the hook, the haken. Yeah? Okay, so now we have the question, who has wrestled? And I searched a little bit in our sources and find two very nice quotes which show us how the social role of wrestling was. The first one is from the Codex Wallerstein, dated on 4070. So wird die Kunst erlobt von Ritter und Knechten. So the art is praised by knights and servants. The term of servant is a little bit problematic because maybe they know, they talk about the servants of war, but other sources around this show that also the servants, the peasants, were wrestling. Okay? And the other one is from the Nuremberg manuscript. It's dated on 3098. Und wisse, dass alle Höfigkeit kommt von dem Ringen und alle Fechten kommen ursachlich und gründlich vom Ringen. And you shall know that all courtly manners comes from the wrestling and that every kind of fencing has its origin in wrestling. Says the first source to Lichtenauer fencing we have. This is a very important term for us. Also, it shows us that especially for the nobles, so the combat class in the medieval ages, the authorized combat classes in medieval ages, the wrestling is very important because if you want to be a noble, you have to be courtly, you have to be höfisch. Yeah? So this little passage says that if you want to be a noble, you have to know how to wrestle. So this should be used by history. I tried, it didn't work. Okay, so wrestling is doing something with your body and with your mind, yeah? And this is the core to be a noble man. So we can say that wrestling is an essential part of the medieval culture. Also when you take a look around, when you have some kind of parties or when you have the pictures of events, yeah, you have a lot of wrestlers. And you could say that every social class in the medieval ages was wrestling. We have proof for the peasants, we have proof for the Bürger. What's the English term for Bürger? Can someone? The citizens, okay, yeah. We have also proof for the priests and we have proof for the nobles. So we can say, to transfer this a little bit easier in our times, wrestling in the medieval ages is like soccer. Yeah? Even if you haven't played soccer, you have seen it. Yeah? And it is very important when we are going into the education of nobles. The nobles started with wrestling very early. We have some sources, some lecture books for the education of young nobles, and they say the people should start with wrestling between the 7th and the 14th age. Yeah? So we can say, before you go to weapons combat, or even if you start with weapons combat very early, you're also starting with wrestling. And now I have a question. Who of you has experience in another martial art? Ah, wonderful. Okay. Who of you have was ever confronted with movement patterns from your old martial art during training or free fight in historical combat? So that your trainer said, yeah, you can do that. Okay. Very fine. That's exactly what I'm meaning. Yeah? Your body is, you have to help me again, prägen. Prägen in English. Marked? Okay, yeah. It's not really marked. It's not like you have a stigma or something. Molded, yeah, right, thank you. Molded. Your body is molded through the experience out of wrestling. So, when you go into weapons combat in medieval times, you are molded as a wrestler. And you start to transfer your movement patterns on the weapons. Okay? And I want to show you some evidence for it. This is from Codex Wallerstein. We have a technique, a lock against a fist fight. So somebody comes in, you're going out, locking, rams, into the stomach. So now, we are now in 1470. Now we are jumping to 50-60. This is from Joachim Meyer in dagger fight. And up here where I have the yellow circle, you can see nearly the same pattern. Yeah? You have a lock, but now you're coming from above. Yeah? Now we are going back in the 15th to Talhofer. Here we have a lock against the messer, and now it is a thrust. Okay? And there's no big difference between making this or when I have my messer, making this. Okay? You see, you have a movement pattern coming from wrestling and going through the different disciplines. As I hold this lecture the last time, some guys came to me after that and they said, you can make this chain even more wider. They told me, and I have checked it, and they are right. You have the same technique in the Talhofer for the longsword, and you have the same technique in an earlier work from Talhofer for the flail. Yeah? So also in pole weapons you can do this kind of technique. Okay? So we can say that we have some kind of concept of economy of movement. Yeah? And this is very important because we are talking about systems making for earnest combat. Yeah? And in earnest combat you can't really switch your movement patterns. Yeah? Through this close relation from a combat system without weapons to the systems for weapons, you have a very big advantage in an earnest fight. For example, I don't have the weapons here now, but let's imagine I'm starting with a longsword. Yeah? So, waving my longsword around. So now something happens and my sword is flying away, and I'm hitting the whole time. So, whoop, flip. Sword is flying away, but I have here my messer. Yeah? Now I'm unsheathing my messer, starting again. So now my messer is flying away. Whoop. Shit! Whoop! Dagger out, and I make an Oberstich. So now my enemy comes in, unwinds my dagger, shit! Hammer fist. You see? So the core for all of the Oberheue you can make with the different weapons is the movement of a hammer fist. When you want to study the hammer fist, watch Terence Hill and Bud Spencer. It's no joke. He's making it very nice. Yeah. And also, this is very important to know. When you are in medieval ages, okay, you are a knight. Yeah, but a knight doesn't have the time to go for hunt all the days and eating stuff and just sitting around and making sword fights. Yeah? You have to watch over your peasants, you have to watch over your food, you have to repair things, you have to work with your hands. So you have to invent some kind of combat training where you can train your body, and while you are training your body, you are training for every weapon you have to use. And that is for a knight, a dagger, a sword, an axe, a flail, a mace, some kind of lance, all kinds of pole weapons. Yeah? So, what are you doing? You are invading an unarmed combat system which holds for, in its movement patterns, the roots for all kinds of weapons. Or, the other way around, you invent weapons which can be combined with this kind of combat, with this kind of movements. Okay? Can you follow me? Okay. So, this has some consequences for the interpretation of armed techniques.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be possible that's partly the other way around? That the weapons have also influenced the wrestling, and that's a two-way road?
Mm-hmm. This is possible, but when we go to the source and he says every kind of fencing comes from wrestling, to the point where he is writing that, we have the relationship I'm talking about right now. I'm thinking that there is a relationship, and it's not only, okay, we have the core of wrestling, and then the weapons were dictated by wrestling. Yeah, there's every time there is an exchange. Yeah, but I try to present you a simple idea you can carry out of this hall. And I don't only have 1 hour of time, and also I'm not a native speaker in English. And to explain this shit, this is very complicated, so maybe another time. Okay? So, when it comes to the interpretation of armed techniques, you have to keep something in mind. The interpretation of an armed technique has to be done with a consideration of principles and movement patterns mentioned in the manuals for wrestling. Okay? And the guys who were at my lecture the hour before realized that in a very nice way. That you can move your body in a special way, And only through moving your body in a special way, you are creating a technique. You don't have to think about a technique. You don't have to think about a sword even after all. Okay? I want to give you a short example. I think I can manage this. I need a volunteer and I need 2 swords. So, thank you very much. So, just one example. When Ingolf is a bad guy, okay, and he is attacking me with an oar. So, okay, I'm blocking, and now he has the dominance, and he's a really good sword, so I have to move backwards. So he has the dominance here, and now please do me a favor and wind and stick it to my shoulder. Over there. Right there. So now I can think a lot about how I can move my weapon and not, and I'm deaf, or maybe I have an injury. Okay, back again. Or I can just think, okay, he is attacking me. I'm moving my shoulder backwards. What happens? That happens again. Slowly. I'm moving my shoulder backwards. My body is twisting around. And through this movement, my sword is also moving. Yeah? I'm getting with my strong, his weak, and now I just simply can let fall the sword, and I have it. Okay? So, a lot of complicated sword work, I don't have to think through just because I'm focused on my body. Okay? Just one example. Thank you. So, but we have another problem, and that is that the writers of our books and also the reader of the books we are using today were already trained wrestlers. And this is like cooking for experts on volume 3. There is no chapter, okay, let's talk about how you use the knife without chopping your fingers off. This is in cooking for beginners. Yeah? So every kind of body movements, of principles of body movements, of the principles how I establish a feeling, yeah, or how I establish a control, especially in the bind, or the question how important is the bind, yeah. They don't have to talk about this in the combat with a longsword, yeah, because when you are an educated wrestler, you already know this. That's the reason the guys are focusing only on the weapon. Okay? But you have to keep in mind, we can do that. When we are starting just to interpret a technique from the treatise without the background of body, we are getting a technique which doesn't work in free fight, okay? And I will give you now a little example from it, and we are going to a very important core of combat wrestling, and these are the evasive movements. Very small movements, like you have seen, where you are twisting only the part of your body which is attacked, and through that you are starting a whole chain of movement going through your whole body, but it's starting every time from the part which is attacked. Okay? So we have some technique from Codex Wallerstein. This is a very special and impressive technique where I heard a lot of times this technique is utter nonsense or simply bullshit because nobody could handle a technique like this. This technique is taken from a big chain of techniques. It's a Stück, yeah? We can talk about the whole Stück now. We will just now move through the Stück to this point, okay? But first I will read out the text, one time in German and one time in English. Item, mehr ein solides Stück, wenn du ihm nach den Ellbogen schlägst. versetzt er dann den Schlag, so fahr hoch auf mit deinen beiden Händen und lass deine linke Hand fahren, fall ihm überein, Beitarm und slache hinter deine linke Seiten und stich mit deinem Schwert zwischen dein und sein durch und leg ihm das Schwert an den Hals, als er gemalt steht, so brichst du ihm den Arm ab und schneidest ihm den Hals ab. Another piece when you attack his elbow with a strike. If he parries the strike, go up with both of your arms and let go your left hand and follow both hands off him and do a strike behind your left side and stab with your sword between you and him through and lay him your sword on the throat. As you can see in the picture, in so doing you break his arm and cut his throat. Okay. We're gonna try this. Better said, they are gonna try this. And I will make myself important. Okay. So, please go simply to this part of the technique. So we have an overhaul, how is attacking with the Winden, Konterwinden, we have the crown. Now, Ingolf is attacking the elbow, just for one time. So, Paul is blocking this. This is an interpretation. He is going down, blocking his sword, and just standing there. No. He's standing there. So, now, after the source, Ingolf shall move his hands around the both hands of Paul. Yeah, lock the sword up. Now he shall bring a step between both of them. Yeah. Moving through the thrust. Yeah, thrust. And now he should lay the weapon on the throat of Paul. So, and now he should cut his throat and break his arm. Okay, up again. Let's take a look on Paul's arm. Can you wait? So, what do you have to do if you want to break an arm on the outside? What do you need?
Extension?
Yeah, you need a stretched elbow. Paul has an angle in his elbow, so this arm won't break. Okay? So, in a way, like it is depicted there, this technique wouldn't work out. Yeah? Especially not in combat. Because Ingolf is standing there, moving around here and there, and over there, and Paul is just standing there. Okay. Paul, a question. When you go again up into the lock of the hands, in the beginning of the technique. Yeah. Lock his arm. So. Can you kick him in the nuts?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, but the interesting point is, when it comes to break this kind of technique, we have two counter techniques. We will discuss them just very shortly, because we don't have so much time. But, as you can see, kicking in the nuts is not an option. Yeah? In one case, it's breaking an arm. In the other case, it's twisting the sword around and cuts his throat with his own sword. We will show this counter technique right now. Yep. First one. Yeah. This is the first one on the left side. Footwork is a little bit different, but never mind it now. Second one, moving through. Now Paul can take his blade and place it on his throat. Okay? So, but why should Paul take the risk of such complicated moves when he simply can crush the nuts of English? There has to be an answer. But we can't find the answer in this text, because the text only deals with the movement of the weapon. This is the very important part. We will make it right now. So, first of all, when you get into an earnest combat, what do you have to attack?
Something vital.
Something vital. Yeah. You can provoke a movement in the enemy when you attack a vital point. Just for example, when somebody wants to touch you surprisingly on your breast, you are reacting in another way as somebody wants to touch you in the face. Yeah? The face is vital. Moving backwards. Okay? So, from our experience in wrestling, and we will plant into this techniques the evasive movements and also some attacks between the attacks which are shown here. Okay? So first, when we go into the bind, wind up to the position of the technique. First of all, first question we have to answer, why is Ingolf able to lock Paul's arms up? Because the distance here isn't right.
First thing is to close in. Yeah, you must reinigen. He has to close in.
Yeah, he has to close in. Because if you are in the after, the nach, you have to get the before. Yeah? But you can't do that if you're just standing around. But what Paul can do here, he can bring the force of his blade down on the blade of Ingolf and can try to cut over the bind into his head. And now Ingolf's weapon is moving backwards and Paul is also coming a little bit forward. And look only at Paul's right wrist. Again, please. It's moving to the elbow of Ingolf. And now he can invent the technique. Lock him up. So, just the lock up, standing. So, now the lock up is a very important point. Paul, can you crush the nuts of Ingolf now? Yes, I can. He can. So, Ingolf has to do something to eliminate this danger. Ingolf, raise your hands a little bit. So, now he is locking Paul's arms and moving him outside. Now, the whole weight of Paul is here. And when Paul is raising now this leg, and Ingolf is moving further, try to kick him. So, there he goes. No, there he goes. So, kicking in the nuts is not an option anymore. But Paul, when you know, where is the force going now? In what direction?
This.
Okay, to my hands. So, when you're following the force now, in which technique you will land? Counter technique? He can move around. He has just to follow the force of the enemy. Okay? So, we have here an interpretation we can explain with one of the counter techniques. Next step. Cutting in, blocking. So, next part. The weapon has to move between Paul and Ingolf. He can do the thrust into the air, but he also can do something else. He can try to thrust Paul. Like this. Right. So, now the fight's over. But if Paul is a trained wrestler, or like, to quote Roland, if Paul has trained with sharps, he has the sixth sense of a weapon. Yeah? And this is very funny, because this is exactly the example Roland showed yesterday. Yeah, you have a weapon going to your stomach, and you have a feeling something is not right, and you're going to evade. And now Paul is twisting his hip backwards. His elbow is very stretched. And now the next step, Ingolf can rotate around his weapon and can try to hit him into the head. So, and now the next evasive movement, when Paul is moving backwards with his head, the weapon is standing in front of him. Now, when it comes to the technique, Ingolf should be able to cut his throat and break his arm when he is trying this now. Okay, now turn around. No. Like this, yeah. You have to see the arm. Okay? You see, the elbow is stretched. Knack. But on the other hand, let's go back into the position. So, Paul is in this position. And now he has the time and also the structure to initialize the second break. Touching Ingolf's weapon, lay it forward, and fuck him up. Okay. No. Okay, thank you very much. So, as you have seen now, we invented now an interpretation of a technique which combines the knowledge extracted from the manuals of wrestling, especially the manuals I used was the Codex Wallerstein and the commented version of Fabian von Auerswald. Okay? And with the main goals of the system and also from earnest fighting. So attack, try to get the Thore, etc. And with the informations of the text. Honestly, I wasn't able to deliver this technique in earnest combat right now because of 2 points. Where isn't the right signal from your enemy, you can't deliver the technique. The guys who visited my workshop yesterday know what I'm talking about. Yeah? The physical signals you have to get, like the elbow, yeah? I can't break an elbow which isn't stretched. Yeah? When I want to break an elbow, I have to stretch it. So, the gaps in the source material, we talked about that. So, what are the consequences right now? The second point I named you just before, but the first point is very important. The incompleteness of the source has to be redefined. Yeah? The sources aren't so incomplete like we think it is. Yeah? If you have questions about footwork, don't look into the longsword, look into the wrestling. And try a little bit wrestling. I tell you, when you have the experience, how it feels when you get a fist to your head, or maybe someone is grabbing your balls, yeah? You get an impression how your body will move and what kind of footwork you will have, okay? So, in most of the cases, all kinds of footworks you can explain over the mechanics of wrestling. Yeah? But if you just think you can fight longsword only by studying the sources of longsword, you can make a very nice training. But you can't deliver these techniques to the training hall, to the free fight. Okay. So when it comes to training, what has to be done is not that you are, like we in Chemnitz did, but we have the time, to open up a wrestling group and recommend for all members of your club to go 1 time a week make wrestling and 1 time a week make some kind of weapon, like dagger or longsword. You can't do that, and I know that, okay? Because we are all working in clubs, and this is not our main job. So we have to find a solution how we can extract the core principles of wrestling and bring it in our weapons training. But first of all, what do you have to bring to your weapons training? Very important for me, every kinds of blows and kicks. Okay, like the hammer fist, the standing fist, all kinds of kicks to the knees, etc. The second one, feeling without a weapon. And this is very important. When you have new guys in your clubs and you try to start with the technique of feeling with a weapon, this is very hard. Yeah, because the weapon, it depends on the quality, making the signal which comes from the enemy a little bit numb. Yeah. But when you touch the enemy directly or your partner, you can feel it very clearly. Okay? The second one is the reading of movement, directions, and differences in height. Okay? This is a very important point when it comes to choosing the right technique or even the right blow. Yeah? We don't have so much time, but just for an example, I can give you just a very short explanation about the relationship between Oberhau and Unterhau. Yeah? The Oberhau is every time a nice idea when you are a little bit higher than your enemy, as your enemy. Okay? On the other hand, the Unterhau is a very nice idea when you are a little bit lower. So, but now is the question, how can you identify in combat if you are a little bit higher as your enemy or lower? Some idea? Yeah, head is a little bit complicated sometimes. Just watch the shoulder line. Okay, you can you can check up the whole height thing about the shoulder line. If your shoulder line is down below the shoulder line of your enemy, you are in a good position to make an Unterhau. It's very simple. You don't have to believe me. I'm sorry I can't explain or demonstrate it right now, but maybe you can try it. Okay. And of course, the evasive movements. Yeah, that's the literature I used for this little lecture, and thank you for your patience. We have 50 minutes left. Any questions? Yeah?
You said that you cannot apply this technique from Codex Wallerstein in free fencing. But I think we can. I think you can. I think you did already. And I think I've seen you doing it in Munich.
With a messer? No. With a messer, yes?
Yeah, with a messer, yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
And I'm also doing it all the time, but I think I don't get that far.
Yeah, right.
I usually do this, and then I hit him once, and then I stab him once, because he's not moving away.
Yeah.
I think if he would move away, I would try to stab him, and he moves away from the stab, and then I could hit him on the back of the head. And if he's moving away the head again, then I could do it. But since the first hit always hits, the first stab always stabs, I don't need to do the technique, because I don't need to learn it, because my opponent is not asking me for.
And,
So I think I think we have the technique, but we don't have the counter to it yet established in our sparring situations.
I think that's what you mean. If you train this
Yeah.
wrestling, when you have the will to move your body,
Yeah.
then you will find the
then
technique.
you need some more technique.
Yeah. What I mean is, I think we have the attack, but I think we don't have the defense or the evasive motions in our sparring.
Yeah.
Before the questions are going further, I just want to give you a little advice. Don't try to do any technique in combat. Just react to the signals the enemy is giving you. When he's moving away, you're going in. When he's not moving away, I don't try a fancy move. I just think, okay, good, it goes in. Right. No? Yes, please?
First of all, I like the lecture very much, thank you. I think the picture of complementary training in medieval times is a bit more complete than just wrestling.
Of course.
Thore mentions dancing, then Steinstoßen, throwing stones,